There is no question that something is here. In the dark. But how will we ever find out what? We need to look, always, and not stop, no matter what stands in our way, no matter what people say. Explore the darkness, shine light into it. Join the red strings and the silver threads. It's all connected. Somehow. I am Mark L. Watson. This is Peer Beyond the Veil.
I want to say I was about 8 or 9, but I might have got the age wrong. And we lived in a little village in Norfolk, a very safe little village. And my younger sister and I were out walking our dog. And there used to be this barn. I call it a barn, but I think it was something to do with the old farrier's blacksmith's cottage. And we always used to dare each other to look through the cracks in the wood in the door, because it was quasi-derelict. But it was like, spooky, as like big dark wood barn and all that. And I remember my sister and I were looking through the door, like the cracks in the wood, and we saw this light, and what I'd call now a light anomaly. Now I equate it was like Tinkerbell from Peter Pan, the way it looked, the way it was shining, and the way it was literally flying around. And anyone who's been in the paranormal, the orb is a real trigger word these days. People don't they get some really, really violent arguments about it. But I saw it. It was naked eye. We both stood there and watched it, and it kind of flew up to where we were looking through the door, hovered in front of us, and then flew away.
As our understanding of the paranormal grows, it attracts more and more people to investigate the various phenomena associated with it. We come to the table from all manner of backgrounds and bring with us the widest array of experiences and approaches. New technologies are developed which allow better vision of various light and energy spectrums, gadgets which allow us to detect fragments of sound otherwise inaudible to the human ear. We capture recordings of voices, noises, words in the dark, and we enhance them and analyze them and run them through all manner of computer programs. But a good paranormal investigator needs to understand much more than that. When the technology and the practices are stripped away, what we are really dealing with in these environments is a line of communication with history. Nothing can be which has not been before. The long, unbreakable line from where you are right now, in this moment, back to the beginning of time, is there. And its importance to all these phenomena is as valuable as anything which may be captured on a camera or recorder. If we truly study the places we visit, the haunted houses and such, and try to best understand those who once lived in those places, we have a far better chance of fully understanding those who may still be there. And so, whilst the cutting-edge technology can be held in one hand, the history book should always be held in the other. Our guest tonight is Penny Griffiths-Morgan, a researcher, writer and podcaster on many aspects of the paranormal and the supernatural, and as importantly, a thoroughly detailed historian. An avid paranormal investigator, not afraid of the darkened spaces from which most of us steer well clear, she imbues her work in the field with the necessary dose of historical study and research. Though some paranormal investigators would say that knowing the history of a site can taint the investigation, allow a subjectivity to creep into the results. And so, In her most recent book, A Haunted Experiment, Penny takes some of the most well-known investigation techniques and examinations, and a few not as well-known, and sets about replicating them, to rather staggering results. We welcome Penny to the show as we try to figure out how she may best set about trying to peer beyond the veil.
The house we lived in, it wasn't an old house, but the village itself, I have traced back to the Doomsday book, and never knew about the site that we were on. We knew that it had stabling, and we knew that the cottage next door was called Forge Stone House. That was part of the old original, another part of the farrier side of things for the farm. So we know that there was a history to the land. And my dad used to work away. He'd work away for months at a time. And I remember there was one time we were all, my mum, my sister and I were sitting in the living room, and our dog's with us. There's nobody else in the house. And they had this glass panel door in the living room, and I watched a shadow of someone walk past the door and creak going up the stairs. And my mum didn't hear it because she was sitting right near the television, but my sister was sitting on the floor near me, and she looked at me and said, "Who's that?" So things like that used to happen quite frequently. To be honest, they still do in my mum and dad's house. And it's not an old house, it's 1960s. But looking into things that I've looked into subsequently and knowing now what I know, it could very well be it's something that was in the land that's still there. And I found out quite recently, in fact, that we believe there was a Methodist church built on that land for about 100 years. It was there before it was pulled down in the late 1700s. So there has been stuff on that land before my parents' house was built there in the 60s. And just things like that used to happen. I think one of the weirdest things that ever happened to me, and this kind of links in the history side, is I loved history at school. Hated it at A-level, failed it miserably at A-level, but loved it as a subject. And I remember when I was 20, I think, my history teacher died quite suddenly. He was only like the age I am now, like mid-40s. And I went to his memorial service because I was really upset because I really liked him. He was the one that really got me to say, question things, don't ever take something for an answer if they don't give you the background, all that kind of thing. And gone to his service in a traditional stone church, and I put my car keys on top of my handbag under the pew in front. Nothing touching it, no hot pipes, it was middle of summer, there's nothing on top of the bag. When I came out the church to get into my car, my key had been twisted 90 degrees and bent over, my car key. Yeah, that was the face, you can't see this, but the face that Mark is pulling right now was the kind of face that I had. And I didn't have a spare because my then boyfriend had broken the spare about 2 weeks beforehand, and I hadn't got around to getting a new one. So I'm having to phone my little sister, because I didn't live at home then, phone my little sister to come and get me, to race me into Norwich, to get to a key cutter to try and get another one cut so I could actually drive home. That was a weird one, and to this day I still don't know whether it was my history teacher doing it because he thought it was funny, or whether if I had got into a car, I might have got into a car wreck and he was trying to protect me. Or the other thing is, about 12 months later, my sister passed away, and I sometimes the hysterical laughter we had trying to bomb into Norwich at peak time to get it, we were just killing ourselves laughing the whole way, and I do wonder if it was to give us that memory. That's possibly one of the weirdest things. And my
way
dad,
of looking at it.
I think you have to, and so I kind of always thought there's something going on here. But then when I sort of got into my late 20s, I decided, no, I'm going to forget all about that, going to focus on my career, get a mortgage. And I'd always loved the history side, going to museums and all that kind of thing, and learning about it, but I hadn't really started delving into it. And it was when I had my first son, at 36, I got made redundant at the same time. So it gave me a lot of time to do stuff, and I started reading more, just exploring things. And that the history side really started to take off from then, even though I'd always had an interest in it. And then I must have been, it was doing night feeds with my younger son, who I had sort of 4 years later. and I was trying to find a decent television program to watch. I mean, you know, you were saying about having young children. You're up at 3 o'clock in the morning. You're sort of sitting there going, "I've got to stay awake to look after them." But and I found this program called Ghost Asylum, which features these ghost people. Do you know it? Yeah, from Tennessee.
Yeah, I know them.
And I thought,
Tennessee Wraith Chasers.
Tennessee Race Chasers, that's them. Yeah, I mean, a couple of them are friends of mine now, ironically enough. And I thought this is quite fun. Once I got the accents, especially Chasey's, I kind of could understand what they were saying. And I thought, wow, I never knew you could do this. I never knew there were gadgets. I didn't know you could go out ghost hunting. This is so cool. And so the next day I started Googling who wants a trainee ghost hunter. And that's kind of how it started. And the history side, sort of, to me, it was so logical to build it in that it was kind of a no-brainer. I got offered Haunted Histories on Parasearch Radio by a lovely chap called Richard Clements, and that would have been, when did I start doing? I want to say it was 3 years ago this April. I started doing the podcast, and that's really when things started to take off.
Not far from Ongar in Essex in the UK, a quiet little brick bungalow is nestled in the thick trees. The tiny wall that holds in the lawn is greening with mosses, as is the tiled roof. Daffodils grow in the front garden, the single dormer window protruding from the roof, dark inside. A short distance away, a nondescript radio mast hides in the woodlands. All is not what it seems at that place. Through the front door of the little home is a tunnel 100 yards long and leading 125 feet underground to a now not so secret Kelvedon Hatch secret underground nuclear bunker. Originally built as an air defence station as part of the UK military's Rota air defence project, it was maintained throughout the Cold War as a potential headquarters of operations should the country come under fire. Built to accommodate hundreds of personnel and to sustain them for anywhere up to 3 months, the facility is equipped with its own generators, power, water and waste, air conditioning and heating, as well as the required military-grade communications equipment, radio broadcasting services and systems for operating even post-nuclear strike. Decommissioned in 1992, the facility is now open to the public as a Cold War museum and a site for overnight paranormal investigations. Reports of full-body apparitions and poltergeists abound, ghosts and spectres and roaming spirits lurking in the shadows that perpetually fill the cavernous underground lair. Terrifying EVPs are frequently captured by investigators there, snapshots into the lives of those who may well be trapped underground. It's certainly the case that very few of the staff who are employed there are willing to walk the long, dark service tunnels alone.
It's a nuclear bunker, but it's one of the big ones. It's one of the ones they call the regional bunkers. So whereas you've got all the different types of nuclear bunkers. So for example, there's one in York. Now the one in York was for the like the observation corps to use, whereas the ones like I don't know if you're going to mention Drakelow Tunnels, but Drakelow Tunnels, Kelvedon Hatch, is about 12 of them around the country. They were these big ones that were used for the regional side of things. But it was built in a lot of people think it was built in the 1940s, but it wasn't. It started being built around 1950, and originally it was to be part of the radar system for England, because they realised, but then they realised that the radar, I think it was called the home chain system off the top of my head, it was a bit buddy dead slow. It wasn't really going to cope with the supersonic aircraft that was jet aircraft that was starting to come through. So they had to change things, and that's kind of when the Cold War was really kicking off. And yeah, so it was designed for like local this area. So I think it wouldn't class be southeast. I think it would be like almost Greater London, East Greater London. I think it was classed as. So for council members, if any MPs were in the area, they'd be allowed to come down into it And it was going to be a thing for them to, that all these 12 regional centres were going to be something for them to run the country from. Fascinating place. It's not, I don't actually find it scary. Some people do. I don't. To me, it feels like a 1960s office block once you get in it. Once you get out of the fact that you're 100 feet or so underground, minimum. I've been there quite a few times now, and I was actually due to be there last week, but the investigation got cancelled because of the virus. But it's quite a dark place when you think about it. So the fact that when you go there, you literally walk up to the site and it's like a little country cottagey sort of wooden cottage thing, and they were all built like that, these ones. And you go in the door and then you're met with this corridor, and at the end of it are the blast doors. If you stand there and picture what that would have been like had they had to go, had the alarm been rung, these doors are huge, absolutely huge. And the other thing is, somebody said, why are there no sort of places for people to stand along the corridor? And I said, that's so that if people were trying to rush to get in, they could be shot. They had nowhere to hide. And things like, when you think about things like that, it makes it sort of like, whoa, that is quite dramatic. I've had quite a few experiences there. I mean, I've had them there during the day when I visited there once during the day it was actually for my birthday. And my husband and I both smelt this burning smell, and there was nothing operating, nothing running, but we both smelt it at exactly the same time. And when I spoke to people afterwards, they said a lot of people have mentioned that in different areas, not the same area. But the experience that really I remember there was, I was doing something called a spirit board. It's not a Ouija board. It's like it just has yes and no answers. And we had this spirit come through. Somebody kept turning on a device that I had in my bag called a spirit box. It's like they call it a broken radio, but it's basically white noise the spirit uses. And it kept turning itself on. And it's not easy to turn these on. There's a button that you have to hold down. And I think it was 2 or 3 times it turned itself on until I went on the board to talk. And this spirit said he wants to talk to me, blah, blah. And he basically was flirting with me. He was like cracking, and at one point they were cracking jokes, and the glass was actually shaking, like he was laughing. But I was sleeping there that night, and I remember I was in on the bunks, and my friend had taken a couple of photos, and it looked like there was an orb on the front of one of the photos. And I said, "Oh, it's just a mark on the sleeping bag that's come up funny." Didn't think anything of it. And then I rolled over to go to sleep. Her husband was fast asleep. He was snoring his head off. She rolled over, and next thing I know, I felt someone grab my shoulder, like squeeze my shoulder. And I, thinking it was her trying to get my attention, I rolled back over and what's the matter? And she was fast asleep, snuggling. It couldn't have been her. So we wonder if it was the same person.
So you say you don't get scared there. What scares you?
Real people. Saying scared is the wrong. I mean, I probably wouldn't like it if I was locked in there on my own and didn't know how to get out. But that's more claustrophobia than just, I'd be like that in anywhere.
Do you think fear plays a part in the experience in terms of maybe something that the entities can feed off, that it drives up the activity? Do you think having somebody in there who is scared encourages it or discourages it?
It's interesting. I go on the opposite. If I'm doing an investigation with people who aren't experienced, I tend to tell them to use what I call the Monsters Inc. theory, that laughter produces more energy than fear. And so I have been called disrespectful before. Now, I never take the mickey out of the spirits. I only take the mickey out of the living, and normally myself, to get people laughing. Because one of the things I've found, and a lot of investigators will agree with it, if you're finding not a lot's going on and you start ignoring them and chatting and laughing and joking amongst yourselves, something will happen. Something will happen. It's a given. So whilst I think fear can produce a certain amount of energy, I think laughter produces more. And I say I coined it the Monsters Inc. theory. So no, I try. I'm not. If I've gone on some sort of guest investigations and they've been trying to sort of fear of God into people, and I'm just like, nah, this isn't how I do it. And any groups I do work with now as a special guest, they know that I will be cracking jokes. I will be trying to make people smile and laugh, and because then it makes the experience they're having a bit less scary. They're more willing. They're like, oh, that's quite cool. And I mean, I've been unnerved at times. I've had things that I've thought, I can't explain this. This has sent a shiver up my spine. But I can't, when people say, oh, aren't you scared? You've had interaction with spirits, or what we think are spirits. Nobody knows for sure, do they? And I said, well, if you think about it, if you walk down the road, how many people genuinely want to hurt you? How many people you see on a daily basis, complete strangers, want to hurt you? Or are they just going about their day? Probably 90% of them, 95%. So what makes you think that every single spirit you encounter wants to hurt you? And that's the kind of, even if one is a bit grumpy, there's probably a reason for it. They're probably sick of being asked, did you die here? What's your name? How old are you? It's like, oh, ask me something different. I mean, you know what it's like. When you do a lot of interviews and you come out with a question that nobody's been asked before, they will say, that's different. And that's what I try and do when I'm doing investigations. I'll ask things that are a bit left of field. And you normally get a response, because it's like, have you been asked the same question for the last 25 years? So it's trying to think out of the box. It's trying to come away from the norm. So I don't know what would scare me. Being trapped, actually genuinely trapped somewhere, not just being shut in a room and told to stay there, but genuinely trapped and no one knows I'm there.
Certainly being in the Drakelow tunnels must have some air of that, because there's miles of them. They're not lit. There's no escape.
3.5 miles, yeah.
If your torch goes out, you're in trouble in the Drakelow tunnels, aren't you?
You always have spare batteries, and you always have at least 2 torches. That is actually, if anyone listening here wants to do an investigation, always have a spare torch and always have spare batteries, because I don't know why, but batteries get drained really fast in certain places. And Drakelow is one. I mean, I've gone through 3 torches in one night before at Drakelow. No, once you get your bearings, it's a weird place. You can almost see in the dark there once you get used to it. That's another one that people have said is, some people feel really like, oh, it's demonic, it's this, it's that. No, it's intimidating when you're the sheer size of it, and the fact that you can drive past it and not have a clue it's there. I did the Leopard Inn earlier this year in Stoke, and there was the odd room in there. It was funny that they told me it's huge, this back part of it. This isn't in the book, but yeah, there's about 3 floors of derelict hotel behind this pub. And the guy who was running it, a guy called Chris Chell from Haunted Houses, he said there's one room corridor in there that women feel really uncomfortable. Doesn't matter who they are. I'm not telling you which it is. So I went wandering off on my own, and there's one corridor I walked down. I thought, whoa, something's not right here. I'm not safe. And I came out, and I told him the corridor, I felt like that it was the right corridor. So there's times like that your spidey senses go, ooh. And yeah, I've been places where I thought, right, yep, I've got it. But to me, it's no different to if I'm walking down a certain road and I suddenly think, there's something not right here. Somebody's following me, or that car's behaving suspicious. It's that same kind of sixth sense that kicks in. It's not necessarily scary because you're aware. I mean, I should think if a werewolf jumped out in front of me, if somewhere like Drakelow, I'd scream, but...
Sure. So what's been your favourite place?
Probably RAF Tivenham, that I wrote about in my most recent book, A Haunted Experiment. The reason being, I've been going there since I was 4 years old. I'd always felt there was something there, but I couldn't put my finger on it. I'd wanted to investigate there since I started doing this, and I finally got given the nod to do it. And just the fact that it had never been investigated before, but it had loads of stories, which I talk about in the book, associated with it. The fact that I had been going there so long, and some of the experiences I had, other people verified they'd had them too. And it's linked with World War II history that most people aren't aware of. The fact that, when I say to people, the actor Jimmy Stewart was a Liberator pilot, and he was a very successful liberator. They like, really? He wasn't just a token gesture? Oh, hell no. No, no, no. I mean, and it was on the back of that I then found out that the village my parents live in, I knew that the 2nd Air Division had been based there, but what I didn't know is how much of the village they took up, and finding out things like that. So that one has probably been my favourite to date, because it's a place that I've coveted for so many years. And also, now I've done it once, they've said they're happy for me to come back and do more, which is amazing. And it was nice to be almost proved right that there is something going on there.
For many of us, the idea of paranormal research, certainly in terms of the notion of ghost hunting, is a relatively new concept, popularized in the past 20 or 30 years by the explosion of network television. But such research dates back to the 18th century, if not much earlier. It was in 1882 that Edmund Rogers and William F. Barrett first formed the Society for Psychical Research. With utilitarian philosopher Henry Sidgwick, its first president, the society would go on to study all manner of abilities and events which could be described as paranormal or psychic. They included hypnotism, thought transference, mediumship, and too the beginning of the wider research into haunted houses and the appearance of apparitions. In 1894, the society published a paper titled The Census of Hallucinations, which sampled 17,000 cases where the claimant had reported seeing things that were deemed not to be there. Roughly 10% of these claimed that they've seen an apparition of a spirit or ghost. Whilst this and many of the other publications of the time were criticised, they paved the way for not only the modern approaches to paranormal investigation, but also for Western psychiatry. Yet older still is London's The Ghost Club, a paranormal investigation and research organisation dating back to 1862 and believed to be the oldest such organisation in the world. It can proudly boast Charles Dickens, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle and Charles Babbage amongst its past members. The names of its members, both living and dead, were solemnly recited every November 2nd, their mortal state notwithstanding, to their status as member. It's even said that on more than one occasion, a member who had passed on would still make an appearance to the others.
I'm a historian, first and foremost, and everything has a history. It doesn't matter what it is. History doesn't have to be Battle of the Bulge. History doesn't have to be the suffragette movement. Everything has a history. And I was actually doing a photo shoot for the Daily Mail. It was it's 2 years ago now, I think. And some of the other investigators who were on it were talking about various different experiments they were using, like using infrasound and all that. And I started thinking, well, what about those of us who want to read up on this stuff, like learn where it came from, learn, who thought of EVPs, who thought of trigger theory, who thought of all this? Well, I want to write up on the history of a few of experiments to see where they came from. It's only really touching on the history of these experiments, because a lot of them I could write a whole book on them, but it's to touch on them, to show people that history doesn't have to be your typical in 1894, blah, 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 that everything has a history, but also to give people an idea of how to play with the paranormal, how to do stuff with it that's a bit out of the box. And so the Philip experiment was the first one I looked at. And that was basically, it was done in Canada. And it was to see if basically a group of people could conjure a spirit. And the analogy I use in it is that they supposedly got a reaction because they did a drawing. And if you look at the front cover of my book, you'll see there's a pencil drawing. Well, that's my version of the Philip experiment, which I actually did at RAF Tibenham. And they did get some stuff off it. And a lot of people are like, well, that proves spirits aren't real because they conjured a spirit. But my argument to it is, maybe they did, or maybe they didn't. I mean, how often, I'll ask you this question, Mark, how often do you get called the wrong name but still answer just to be polite?
Sure.
Yeah, I've been called Peggy, Jenny, Polly, you name it.
Sure. Sure.
In fact, there's an in-joke. One of the podcast groups always calls me Peggy now, because it's an in-joke that, that I'll answer to anything. And I said, well, maybe this spirit that they were calling Philip was just so bored, hadn't had anyone to talk to. Maybe his name was actually Peter. And he thought, it's close enough. I'll answer them. I'll play along. Sure. And apparently that was something not a lot of people had ever thought of, that maybe it was just a case of mistaken identity. Or, someone thought, they call him my name. It's close enough. So that was one. Another one was something called the Estes method, which was devised in Colorado. And I actually have a mini interview with one of the founders, a guy called Carl Pfeiffer, who's one of the loveliest guys you could ever speak to. He's so. Have you spoken to him before?
I haven't, but I'm a
awesome
fan, and I've heard him speak to Jim Perry on Euphomet, and the whole both him and Connor are both
yeah,
cool.
Connor Randall, yeah, they're both absolutely gorgeous people. But Carl did an interview about the Estes method, and we talked about that. I also did one on EVPs, because they're one of the most common things that people use, and where that came from, some of the people who devised that, so Rowdy, even those kind of people. And then I also looked at trigger work, Singapore theory of familiarization, because that's one of my favorite things to do. My sort of thing with trigger work is, if you're a newbie and you haven't got much money for equipment, and you don't need equipment, which the guys from Are You Haunted prove, you don't need equipment. Triggers are brilliant, because the only limit on a trigger is your imagination. So, for example, it's very easy. We had some Glenn Miller music downloaded onto a phone when we did the airfield, and started playing that. That got something to. That's not going to cost you anything to get some free music onto your phone. What else have I done? I've started, if I've been somewhere where I knew German POWs were held, I'll start speaking in German to see if that triggers anything. And so that's where it came from. And then I took 3 locations. I thought, I'll try some of these experiments at them. And the 3 locations were Harwich Redoubt in Essex, RAF Tibenham, and also the Kersal in Southend. And it was just to show people that you can have fun with it. They weren't proper scientific sort of experiments. They weren't done in that kind of way. They were more to show things can happen, and you can have fun, and your only limit is your imagination. I always used to think there was some kind of other realm, it's an energy. People's energy it stays. The more I've done of this, it really depends what day I wake up on, because some days I still think that's the case, but then other days I think maybe it's some of the theories, like it's a time slip, or it's a parallel universe you're communicating with, or who's to say we're not the ghosts and they're the people who are living? In all honesty, I don't know. All I know is that, and there's telepathy. It's us, some kind of telekinesis and telepathy we're producing. All I know is some of the things I have seen and heard and found and backed up with history that I didn't know beforehand, like specific names and that kind of thing. Something is going on. Something is going on, because some of the things that I might put forward as evidence, it's very hard to explain.
Do you think ultimately it might be all of the above? In some instances, you are speaking with a sentient being who is giving you answers on a board or through a machine, because there is some sort of conscience left within that being, and they're able to communicate. Instances of residual energy where you might be witnessing a scene or something.
Yeah.
And then at the same time, something like thought projection, where if you were truly not even just a skeptic, but a cynic, and you had no belief, you might go into one of these sites like you're doing and not witness anything. Shrug it all off, because your mind is closed to that being a real experience, a true experience, as you see truth, as you see your reality. Somebody who is very, very open will see it differently and may have a whole wealth of experiences on the same night, and you're witnessing the same things, but your energy is tuned differently to it.
Yeah, I've seen that. I've seen that with groups when I've done sort of the public investigations. I know I did one at Gresson Hall Workhouse in Norfolk, and we had a lady on our thing who, no matter what happened, it wasn't real. I mean, we had a spirit box going. It said our name, each of our names when we asked it to repeat them. It was using descriptive, and she was still saying, no, that's not happening. That's not what's happening. And everyone else could hear it. Even some of the cynical husbands who'd been dragged along by their wives to come on it for the night, they were hearing it. And we were in one room, and it was really, I could feel there was an energy in there. It's weird. It feels like there's electricity in the air. That's the only way I can explain it. And the medium who was with us was a good friend of mine. He could feel it as well, but nothing was happening. And we thought, this is really weird. And this woman went out to go to the toilet. And the minute she went out, it was like something had unblocked. And we had stuff moving. We had shadows coming past doors. We had, and there wasn't anyone outside. We checked. But the minute she came back, so yes, I do see that people.
She was blocking it.
I did. It was a spirit board again, the yes no one once, and it was in a place called Strangers Hall in Norwich. And if I'm an investigator on there looking after public, I don't tend to do the boards and things because they think you're pushing it. But they needed someone on it, and I went, all right, I'll send it. You can see where my finger is. You can see I'm not pushing it. I think I even did it at the back of my finger, like my fingernail. And it was moving, and we were coming up with answers. And one of the guests turned around and said, look, I'm sorry, you're part of this group. I want to go on and see what happens. Because they'd been doing it and nothing had been happening. She went on, and the glass was literally flying around the table. And I was like, it's just unblocked. There's enough energy now for it to, it's just unblocked because I believed it could happen, therefore it happens. Now, that could be telekinesis. It could be a form of telekinesis that we don't understand yet. But when you then take the answers to the questions you've been given away, I think there was a good one. I think it was at the Kurzel. I didn't go on the board for that reason. I was sitting off watching, and I was kind of like just in my head sort of saying, please come through, please talk to them, because they were all quite new people. And it came through. There was someone there. Yes. Were you based in Southend during the war? No. Do you know someone who's sitting in this room? Yes. And they start going, does your first name begin with A? No. B? No. D? No. C? No. D? Yes. And I'd recently found out that my great-grandfather had fought in World War I. And I'd been talking about him that week on a school presentation to my kids' school. And yeah, it was him. I wasn't touching it. I wasn't influencing it at all. So yeah, you can sometimes unblock it by using a positive energy. But then again, with cynics, it doesn't. They could have something thrown at their head, and they'd still say, nah. I find there's the cynics that no matter what you present them with, they'll never believe it. I find there's the believers who won't question it. Then there's the skeptical believers, which is what I'd call myself. I'm always skeptical, but I believe it's possible. And then there's the skeptics who are not quite sure yet. I mean, my dad, he's an engineer, phenomenally intelligent guy. Never used to believe in any of this until some of the stuff I've presented him with. And now he's coming around to the idea it's possible. So yeah, I find there's different, but there's also the people who say they don't believe, I don't believe. And then when you dig in, the reason they say they don't believe is they're scared it could be true.
Penny, what's next? Where are you going to be experimenting next? Anywhere you have on the bucket list that you want to go to at some point in the future? What have we got lined up?
So many places I want to go to. What I'll get to do, I don't know at the moment. I'm due to be doing a charity event at a place called The Village near Nottingham in Mansfield in September, if that goes ahead. But at the moment, I'm focusing more on my podcast, the writing I'm doing, and I've got book 3 sort of well underway as well. So I should think my next sort of visit will be to where book 3 is based, which is the British Schools Museum in Hitchin. But as for investigations, I don't know because all these places, they're only just starting to reopen again, and a lot of the groups that I would tag along with, because I have to mention some of the groups I work with: Haunted Happenings, Haunted Houses Events, HD Paranormal. Keep Paranormal, Fright Nights, Simply Ghost Nights. They're all great because they run these events in these great places and then say, come on, you tag along, you can go off and do your own thing, and then we'll look after the public. And it's great because I get to go into places that I wouldn't be able to afford and have a play and just sort of sit and absorb.
The third book's on its way.
Yes.
Where can people find it? Where can people follow you, and obviously to the new book once it's released?
Right. Anything, just Google Haunted Histories and you will either come up with my YouTube account, my Twitter account, my Facebook account, my website. It's all under Haunted Histories. My podcast is called Haunted Histories. My YouTube channel is called Haunted Histories. It's hauntedhistories.co.uk. All of that. And you type in that and you'll find me. The books are available on Amazon worldwide, Kindle as well as hard copies. I'm not sure when the new book will be out because obviously it's been delayed because of the pandemic. I'm hoping by the end of this year, fingers crossed, but it all depends on being able to get into records offices and that kind of thing, because I don't just write experiences, I write facts. And yeah, this has delayed it by about 6 months probably, but we'll get there. We'll get there.
Well, thank you so very much for taking the time to come and speak with us. We can't wait for the third book. Be interested to find out where you're going next. Obviously, your
I'll tell you off the record. I'll tell you off the record, Mark, what's next.
Brilliant. All right. Well, thank you so much, and yeah, we're a pleasure talking with you.
Cool.
Right.
Thank you.
Peer Beyond the Veil has been written and presented by myself, Mark Watson. Music and soundtracks are credited and licensed to Purple Planet and to Kevin MacLeod, licensed under Creative Commons. All rights are reserved by our parent company, MLW Publishing. You can follow us at facebook.com/Peer Beyond the Veil, or on Twitter at Peer Beyond the Veil or at Peer Beyond 2020. Please click the like and subscribe buttons when you see them, most importantly wherever you listen to your podcasts. It helps us to attract the attention we need to keep the show going, to get the guests that you all want to hear from, and to help more and more people peer beyond the veil.